Have you ever met someone and thought their job sounded cool? Or perhaps you're wondering how you can get to a position that doesn't seem to match any of the qualifications you have at the moment? Well, if so, this podcast is for you.
We found some people with jobs that you might not necessarily know about or expect people to have, and we're going to ask them about how they got there.
Welcome to What Do They Do? A podcast about jobs and how people got them.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today we are talking to Jemina Talja, who works in the charity sector, but that doesn't do enough justice. So I'll pass over and say hi to Jemina. Hi Jemina, how are you doing?
Hi Ben, hi Dean. Yes, so my name is Jemina. I work in the international development NGO sector. And currently I'm splitting my time between two small charities in the UK. I'm a CEO of a small charity that supports survivors of human trafficking in India. And then I also do some grants management and fundraising work for another charity that runs a hospital in Haiti, as well as some maternity and disability programs in South Sudan and in the refugee camps of Uganda.
That's quite a lot of stuff to cover and really sort of impactful work that you're doing. So hopefully we can get through some really interesting chat around those. But I suppose the first question is this something you imagined yourself doing growing up? Or did you have a different trajectory in mind when you were sort of younger?
Yeah, I think when I was younger, well, my mum always thought I was going to be a solicitor. I don't know if that's everyone's mum. And I think I wanted to be foreign correspondent journalist who went to all these exciting countries. And you know, I enjoyed writing and I enjoyed travel and adventure, and those were the things that I was really into. And I think the international development and the charity aspects came a bit later on, but I think there's kind of similar fundamental ideas behind both areas of work. So yeah, I think that was the journey in a nutshell. I'm sure there was a lot more complex turnarounds and swings and roundabouts to it, but yeah, foreign correspondent journalist was the dream when I was young.
Was that just as a way? Were you looking for a way to travel, and that seemed like the best way to travel, and not necessarily to the predictable places?
Yes, I think so, and I think also just the love of writing. So I think I saw that as a career that would combine those two. And I've met a few women who've worked in conflict areas as correspondents, which has been quite interesting. It's been quite a recent development, and I met someone who worked closely with Marie Colvin in Syria, etc. And I met someone who worked at The Guardian as a conflict area correspondent, who has since founded her own charity supporting women who undergo FGM. So it's been quite interesting meeting people, especially women who are in that area of work now at this stage in my career, thinking back to those dreams of a young girl.
I mean, I suppose if you are in those situations, it must be almost inhumane to not notice what's going on and want to take some kind of action against the situations you see unfold in front of you when you are exposed to it like that. So yeah, I suppose it would be amazing if correspondents weren't trying to do something about the situations they see.
Yeah, I think I can't, to be honest, even imagine how difficult and kind of mentally challenging that line of work is. I mean, there are challenges to what we do in my line of work, and when we go out there, and you have to be prepared to meet what you meet. But I think the aspect of danger in that journalism, and that area of journalism is a bit more present at all times. So, and especially for women, of course, still an area not many women are in, but also kind of personal safety aspects in that front as well.
So, having sort of thought about a sort of foreign correspondent and the writing, what educationally did you end up doing, and then where did you end up going sort of after education and college and that kind of thing?
So I did a foundation course on international development before university, and I did that in Finland. And as part of that course, we did 2-month trip to India, where we wrote some articles and visited some local NGOs, etc. And then I chose to do social anthropology at university. So I did a joint degree of social anthropology, sociology, and gender studies. And I think the gender aspect for me was more, I was quite interested and keen to work on women's rights issues. So the degree that I chose was something that I saw would combine both the international work and women's rights. However, life happens, and after university, I needed money, and I ended up in the corporate sector doing events in London after a short internship in Geneva for putting together events for the UN and the NGO sector. So I did kind of legal events and corporate conferences, etc., for a few years until I then ended up in the charity sector eventually.
Was it something during that job in events that gave you a look at kind of what you wanted to do for the future? Was there a particular point where you just thought, right, this is it, I need to switch now, I want to go into the charity sector and do something different?
I think at that point it was already there, and I think before my degree it was already there. I think it was always the plan that I would go into the world of charities. It was just a detour I had to take because I had to make a living. But for me, I think, you know, from the foreign correspondence plans and how I ended up wanting to work for the charity sector, there was a few moments when I was a teenager that kind of clarified that for me. My parents like to travel a lot. And whilst they didn't do it in any kind of adventurous way, they did a lot of package holidays, but they took me to a lot of interesting places. And I think I was about 14 when we were traveling around Malaysia and Singapore. And we were in Kuala Lumpur, and we stayed in this lovely 4 or 5 star hotel. I think my parents had saved a while for this big trip, and we stayed in this beautiful, luxurious hotel, fairly high up on a high rise. And I spent a lot of time on this windowsill seat, looking out of the window and looking at the views. And right next to this hotel, as is the case in a lot of developing countries, next to luxury, there's less fortunate ways of living. And next to this hotel, there was a huge slum. And for me, I still kind of remember that experience and those moments quite profoundly, kind of sitting there, spending a lot of time looking out that window and looking at where we were and looking at where those people were right next to us, and how insane that was, how unfair that was, and how unjust that was, and like what had we done to deserve our places in the world. And for a 14-year-old, I think it just affected me hugely, affected my kind of view of the world, and it didn't necessarily clarify anything. It just brought more questions in of how are we allowing this to happen, etc. So I remember that moment very clearly, and I think it was the start of something.
And you mentioned, I mean, it sounds profound. You said it was profound and it raised a lot of questions. And did you ask those questions of your parents at that time? Was it something that you talked about with them as well?
No, I think that's not necessarily the type of relationship I had with my parents. But I think at that point, I kind of realized that I wanted to learn more about all of that. And I think my future studies and future interests were affected by that. So I started looking into kind of what I would do after graduating high school and what that high school, I call it in Finland, the similar equivalent. And I think from those moments, it kind of started, I started carrying those thoughts with me, what might happen and what I might want to focus on in the future.
It's amazing that effectively one moment as a teenager is what has led your journey through life and your career. And I'm excited to find out more.
Yeah, because it sounds like obviously that those moments and those reflections kind of informed what you went on to study and do at university. You've obviously talked about then that challenge. I think a lot of us find is might find a passion or purpose, but that passion or purpose doesn't always lend itself to paying bills straight up, and you have to kind of grapple with that. But obviously now you have found a way to kind of combine those as obviously sort of having a profession which allows you to start addressing those. When you made that transition from events to charities, had you learned sort of better by that point about how you could use your time and sort of focus on some of the areas that you wanted to focus on?
I think I had to make some compromises, to be honest, because I think at the time of studying for my degree, etc., I think the idea was that I would be doing a lot of field work in, Africa or wherever it might be, and doing program work for NGOs in the field, whereas by the time I'd kind of worked in events for a while and was in the position to start applying for charity jobs, it's not so easy, firstly, to get into the programmatic side of things. I mean, it's a competitive world, but also I think my key skills in the work of employment were in events and in operational things. So I continued to be in events, but in the charity sector. So I took those skills and I took them to the sector I wanted to be in. And I worked for a couple of charities that their causes weren't necessarily a huge interest to me or huge passion to me personally. But I gained that experience of working in charities from there. So it was a bit of a long journey, to be honest. And then I think at some point I had to just adjust that whole, what does it mean to me working in this sector? Is it being in the field and, digging trenches myself, or is it working in the office and doing the support work or running the charity? And of course, then when you have a family as well, it kind of comes to play on what are you able to do and where do you want to spend your time. So compromises along the way.
Always. So where you mentioned work in Haiti and India, and obviously you got some connections in East Africa. So when you started working with these charities, did that begin to allow you to start exploring these places a little bit more and getting out in the field, even though that wasn't your primary role?
Yeah, it did. And even before that, I worked for other international development charities before my current ones. And I've done some field visits and some travel in the project countries. So previously I worked for charities that work in Africa, and I've been to either kind of assess the local need so we can translate those needs into projects and fundraising back in the UK or in Finland or wherever I was based at the time, or going back and assessing the impact of our projects so we can report back to funders and our stakeholders and make sure that what we're doing is actually impactful and we're not just running projects for the sake of existing as a charity. So yes, and I think at the moment, considering I still have a fairly young family, and well, of course, at the moment, nothing's of the sort is happening, but I think I go out about twice a year and spend some time out whether it's in Haiti or Africa or India, and that's kind of the reason why I am in this line of work. When you're out there and you see what's happening and what your work has partly been, making an impact on, and those lives that have been touched, and if I'm honest, part of it is also, for me personally, that's getting out there and having an adventure as well, and seeing kind of these places that I wouldn't normally be able to travel to. So those couple of weeks a year, they kind of keep me ticking over.
And you mentioned you're a CEO of a small charity. It's called Adventure Ashram. Could you maybe give us a bit more info about what the charity does, and perhaps about one of those trips, and to give us an example of the kinds of work that you've been involved in when you've been able to go in person?
Sure. So Adventure Ashram is a bit of a niche charity in that it was actually set up by a group of adventure motorbikers. So initially it was set up by these folks because they did these adventure biking trips into different countries, and India was one of them. And they came across this need and these projects that they wanted to support. So this was before my time, but that's how it initially started. And I've been with them for about 3 years now. And there are a few different kind of lines of projects that we support, but the main thing is supporting survivors of human trafficking in southern India, and we work with a local partner that's established down there, and they run 2 safe houses for survivors. There's a safe house for girls and women, and then another safe house for underage boys. And what they do is they stage brothel rescues, or they take in women or young boys from the streets and provide them a safe place to live, help them access education, etc. And so we support all that work financially, but then we run our own projects alongside all of this ongoing work. And those projects are around kind of providing vocational support. So we've established a mechanics workshop, and there's a bakery workshop and a beautician workshop for these survivors, so that they can learn skills that will help them become financially independent in the future, and maybe kind of prepare them for mainstream society outside of those safe house walls in the future. So that's kind of the key area of Adventure Ashram's work. And as far as those trips go, I mean, I've visited the safe houses and spent time with the survivors and with the directors of those safe houses. And I think, the work they do is amazing, and it's wonderful to see the opportunities provided. But I think the things that I remember best are seeing the videos and seeing the footage from the rescue missions, because they are quite something. I think, a lot of these brothels are run by trafficking gangs, and they are quite ingenious, and they know what they're doing. And in a lot of these rescues, there might be fake walls erected on bathrooms where they, if there's a raid, they hide the girls behind these fake walls, so no one knows they're there, and obviously they're frightened and keep silent. And seeing all this footage, and it's quite harrowing, and obviously then seeing the help and the support that the girls and women and boys that we help get is fantastic, but it also brings it home that it's just a small fraction of a percent of people that we are able to help as a small charity, and trafficking is a massive global issue.
This obviously the impact on those individual lives of people that you have managed to save should not be underestimated, and I hope you all give yourself the credit you deserve with that. But I suppose it's inevitable that you start looking at what more can be done and the scale of the problem. Is that one of the biggest challenges of working in the sector that you do, that kind of wanting to always tackle more and there being sort of scarily insurmountable challenges to take on?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a question for all of us, is kind of, when do you look at the world with the kind of fatalistic lens, and when do you how do you remain optimistic? But I think it is a challenge, but I think, you're not able to just kind of look at the massive problems of the world and take them all on. You need to kind of focus your work and your projects and your impact onto what you can achieve as a small charity. So I suppose it is challenging, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily the biggest challenge in our sector. It's always positive, and it's always great to expand and grow and increase our impact and increase our reach. And there are larger charities that are reaching huge amount more people than ours are. But I think the issue underlining that question and so many others for small charities is funding. And that's the frustration, and that's the biggest challenge I think small charities tackle with, especially right now. Is we could be doing so much more, and we want to be doing so much more, but even delivering what we are doing now is at risk. And even getting the funding to maintain our services is a lot of hard work. So yeah, I think, if something keeps me up at night, it's that.
Now, obviously, we've hinted at it a few times that we are recording this at the end of 2020, and the year's been difficult for a number of ways. But obviously, from what I understand, it's hit charities very hard this year in terms of funding. Has that been your experience, like compared to 2019 into 2020, as the funding become ever more challenging?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's especially the case for international organizations. I think I've done some consultancy work for kind of UK-based organizations that deliver their services in the UK before, and having chatted to them, I mean, everyone's finding it hard, but there's a lot more funding available for charities that provide services in the UK, and a lot of the kind of COVID specific funds are just for UK based projects, etc. And I think the international development sector has kind of been, to be honest, forgotten in all of this. And not only that, then obviously the UK aid budget is being slashed, etc. So it is really difficult. And it was only a couple of months ago that there was a few articles in the kind of mainstream newspapers about small international development charities in the UK, and it said that over 50% of them are looking to close their doors in the next 12 months. And I kind of, I understand to a degree. It's not how I personally think, but I understand to a degree that whole, help where you are and help your neighbor, of course. And I understand the thinking that people kind of see that, you want to help others within our borders or however it may go. But of course, being in the sector that I am, I see the need and I feel the need elsewhere. And I also kind of think that, for example, with the COVID crisis, none of us are safe until we're all safe. It doesn't matter if we get rid of COVID altogether within the UK, unless, we close our borders indefinitely, and that's that. As long as there's COVID in Africa, none of us are going to be safe. So I think the kind of global thinking has suffered immensely in the last 12 months. And with that, yes, funding for small charities, small international development charities is just barely existent at the moment. So that means obviously adjusting and readjusting programs and trying to look at how we're going to navigate this.
Ben and I both have a background in education, and I'm just struck by your example earlier when you were on this holiday and you were 14 and you saw the difference in what you were experiencing versus the people just across the street. And I'm wondering, do you think there's a gap in the way that we approach these types of topics and the topic of international development as a whole at school? Do you think we could do more so that people did have a wider view of the world as a whole rather than just defaulting to saying, okay, we need to help people who are here first?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert in education or how it's approached right now, but I would assume, yes, I would assume it could be done better. And it's not even just the international development aspect. I think it's just the whole kind of being a global citizen and learning about other perspectives. Like, as you know, I wasn't raised in the UK. I was raised in Finland, but I've lived in a couple of other countries as well. And I think what I've found everywhere I've lived is everything we learn is very kind of, it's very biased. I mean, whether it's the whole, we've got the best healthcare system in the world that you hear in every country you go to, or if it's a certain way of celebrating, a certain war or the outcome of it, or, whatever it might be, whatever we learn is very kind of comes from one perspective. That's what I think. And that's how I've kind of felt in these different countries that I've lived in. And I find it quite fascinating, and I'm quite intriguing that you do come across those same arguments in every country. I remember, I did an exchange year in Australia before university, etc. I was 17, 18, and I remember so clearly, like, my host family introducing me to the Australian culture and emphasizing certain elements of the Australian culture as being the best in the world. And I was thinking, well, that's exactly what they say about these same things in Finland, and that's exactly what they say, in the UK about the NHS, etc. And it's lovely to a degree, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe we should look at the world and go, well, maybe we're not the best at everything. Maybe they are doing things okay in Namibia or here or there, and learn from each other.
That's a really interesting concept, isn't it, around outside perceptions. I think particularly Africa seems to suffer from this in my own experiences. I know my own children, when we talk about charity, will sometimes kind of blanket the whole continent of Africa as looking a certain way, or there's a certain situation going on, and we try and tackle that with them.
The Live Aid syndrome.
Yes, and yeah, that this idea that kind of there's no one doing great things in certain places, or everyone's doing great things out in one place. I mean, I was lucky enough to do a trip to East Africa, so Tanzania, a few years ago, where we went and played football. But that sounds similar to how Adventure Ashram was set up, that this guy was doing a bit of teaching out in Tanzania, and on a day trip out to a local town called Mahenge, he stumbled across an orphanage. And he was fortunate enough that his family had a bit of money, and they set up a charity. And that orphanage was based around children that generally got abandoned because the parents just didn't quite know how to care for them, whether they had sort of disabilities of various kinds. So we went out there and did a trip, and that was kind of my first proper chance to sort of see Africa. And you just see it very differently. It's not characterized by the things that you saw on Live Aid, as you say. But my question really is, you and I both live in sort of Surrey, West Sussex area, and have got young children. And I know I'm kind of debating how I give my own children a kind of balanced global view. I mean, I've also got two boys, so there's another aspect here about how they treat other people as they go out and about in the world. But I just wondered if you, like, with your own perspective, like how you're looking at sort of giving your own children that perspective that you got in Malaysia when you're sitting in that hotel window.
Oh, Ben, parenting advice. I'm not the person for it.
None of us are, but we would all like to share.
No, that is a tricky one, isn't it? I think it's just having these things in the conversation. I mean, I suppose the world of our children growing up and the information that they have, the access to information and all of that on their fingertips is very different from how we grew up anyway. But yes, it is. I think that's one of the fundamental questions of parenting, is how do we raise good people? And I certainly struggle with it and try to kind of keep that in the forefront of thinking. I think, because of what I do, I think these conversations are present in my house, maybe more than others, I don't know. And, especially when I'm getting ready to go on my trips and we kind of talk about what's going to happen and where I'm going, and when I come back and show pictures and kind of trying to keep it balanced. But certainly, we have those moments when one of my children goes, boys don't do ballet, or say something like that, and it's like, right, let's have a chat about this, as all parents do. So I don't really have an answer to that. It's just a case of doing our best and leading by example and showing what we see. That whole kind of the thing you mentioned about Tanzania being different from the images that are portrayed, and the same is the case for whole of Africa, really. I think that's something that I can fairly easily kind of show my children through my trips, and show pictures, and they're like, oh, it's so green and it's so lush and it looks like a jungle, and it's like, yes, it's not all a desert, and da-di-da, and those conversations at that age appropriate level.
Was there a point where you take your children on a trip with you?
I would love to. I would absolutely love to. Now my son is only 4, and he's a bit wild, so I would be more scared of. Well, I would be scared for Africa, to be honest. It's the safety aspect more than anything else. But yeah, absolutely. When things return to some kind of normality, hopefully, we can look at that. But it is interesting, how we protect our children from these things. And then, so the other charity that I work for, that works in Haiti and in South Sudan and Uganda, the founder and CEO of that charity, with his wife and their 2 small children, have lived in Haiti and lived in Uganda, and taken their kids to North Uganda for weeks and stayed there locally, etc. So it's, it's perfectly doable. It's just we kind of we scare ourselves, don't we? And we have these. Of course, we want to protect our children, and I wouldn't take them to South Sudan right now. But there is that balance, and there is that conversation you need to have with yourself: is, are my fears grounded, or am I just being overprotective? And is that founded on reality?
I suppose the before that point, there's also just hoping that they might challenge any misconceptions that they hear as well, isn't it? That, I mean, that's what maybe another learning from 2020 we've all had is tackling things that we see, maybe not being a passive and sort of letting things pass by that we might internally not agree with, but always saying something as well.
It's hard though, isn't it? The whole trying to avoid conflict and situations of conflict, even if you're kind of on the right side of history with what you want to say, it's difficult.
I think with all of these things, if you are thinking consciously about them, that's a good starting point, right? And that's the starting point for those conversations at home, or with students in school, or even with family members. I just want to jump 1 second. You mentioned we mentioned that you're the CEO of Adventure Ashram. You just mentioned in this last bit here that you work with another charity as well called Hope Health Action. And for them, you're the grants and trust coordinator. So I'd love to find out more about what does your day-to-day work look like in both of those roles. You talked about kind of where the funding goes and supporting the local teams. And sometimes you get to go on trips to actually see some of this work take place in person. But what is your actual day-to-day normally?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, it's quite a challenge, to be honest, juggling 2 part-time roles, one of which is a CEO role, which means by nature that it isn't part-time. So I'm quite busy. But for the CEO role, I mean, it's anything from governance and compliance with charity law and the charity commission requirements, etc. It's some of it can be really just office-based paperwork, reporting to funders. Some of it is planning new initiatives, whether it's new programs that we can deliver in India, or whether it's new fundraising initiatives. Right now, all of that is a little bit iffy because a lot of that would, in normal times, be events, etc., that we would plan for our supporters. But then also, yes, approaching funders, whether it's trust funders in the UK, whether it's international funders, whether it's corporate funders, or if it's, sending newsletters to individuals who are giving us monthly donations, etc. So it's basically, for the Adventure Ashram role, it's kind of anything and everything to run a charity. And because we're so small, there's only 3 of us. So we can't really just have a defined kind of, this is my area of work and that's it. We all need to kind of dip in, although, one of us is a finance manager. So they have a more defined role. But yes, so there's a lot more probably than people think to running these organizations, even when they are small, because you do have to do your communications, you do have to do your compliance and governance, you have to do your fundraising, you have to do your project delivery, and etc. HR, all of that. But then for Hope Health Action, my role is a lot more simple and clear. I go out to trust funders in the UK, internationally, or in the US, and I put together funding bids. So I kind of package whatever it is we're doing in Haiti or Uganda or South Sudan, and I try and make it an attractive project for a specific funder, and then I kind of liaise with the funders, do reporting to them, etc. So that's fairly straightforward. But yes, so a weekly, I kind of jump from one role to another and try and keep them in their little cubby holes in my head, so I don't get them mixed up, and get on with whatever the task at hand is at any given time.
And it's clear this has been a passion through your life since you were a student. And so I'd love to know what you enjoy most about what you do. I can imagine that at times it can feel difficult, not just because of the amount of work, but also the things that you're having to think about. And you mentioned the videos being sent to you, for example, which kind of, must put you in two minds sometimes. This is a great thing we're doing, but also completely harrowing that this even happened in the first place. So I'd love to hear about what you enjoy the most about your work.
Well, apart from those trips to kind of see the impact and speak to the people and kind of just see what the result of our work is, which I mentioned earlier, I think, I love those times when we get some wins, whether it's a grant or whether it's a new supporter or whether it's, I don't know, somebody writing to us and telling us how touched they've been with our work or whatever it might be. So those things, yes. But then also I think, like you said, yes, it's harrowing as well. And you face those things and you go, well, what we're doing is barely scratching the surface. But then you are faced with the question of, well, what am I going to do then? Am I going to do nothing because I can't solve this problem? Or am I going to carry on trying to do something here? And I think for me, I don't want to go back to the corporate world, if I put it bluntly. It's, for me, the kind of the purpose of what I'm doing is in our impact. And it's a complex world, and anyone could argue that Google, for example, is probably saving a lot more lives than we are because they can afford to give big grants or give corporate support to a lot of charities. So I'm not naive enough to think that in the corporate world people aren't making a difference. But what gets me out of bed personally is that knowing that there is this higher purpose that we're working for.
Absolutely. I love that. I love what you said about do something, because I think people can be easily set back by an overwhelm of the size of a challenge to be faced. And if everyone felt that and some people didn't just move forward and do something, like that something is always going to be really, really positive. As you say, these challenges are huge.
And you know what, the kind of the social media and that whole kind of climate of conversation does nothing to aid that kind of thinking, because you go out there and you say, I've donated to Oxfam, and there's 20 people saying, well, why are you doing that? Why aren't you donating to the homeless charity down the road? Right. Or you're vegetarian and you've been told that you're not doing enough because you're not vegan, or whatever it might be. There are always a handful of people who are happy to criticize your choices. So I think that also can become quite overwhelming for people, and they go, well, what's the point of doing anything? Or if we can't completely solve this problem, then why bother?
Do you find with that particular challenge that around like Adventure Ashram being a small focused charity, that actually the storytelling around that and engaging people with that becomes a little bit easier because it is very tangible of we work directly, these are the impacts of your money, and does that help in any way with sort of getting people on board with the
I think people like the fact that it is a small organization and we got very direct links to the people we're helping, and there's not this massive bureaucracy, and we're not slow to move because of that or because of a lot of red tape, and so there's a lot of transparency that comes with that. So I think our supporters certainly, love that and value that, and they feel that they're part of our organization. They're not just, another person out of 1,000 who gives a bit of money every month. So we have those conversations, and that's kind of our USP to a degree. But there's other people who see the impact of a larger organization and they feel they want to be a part of that, and that's all. It's all good. Like we said, let's just do something.
Exactly that. In terms of like obviously your experience of the corporate world probably informs your decision that you don't want to go back there. But if you were to go back to sort of teenage Jemina and give her advice, whether that's on holiday in Malaysia or wherever it may be, what tips would you give to your teenage self now that you've sort of know what you know?
I think I would still love to experience, even now, I would still love to experience that whole kind of staying out there in the field for a while and delivering the work myself. So I think, if I was able to go back, I would probably encourage myself to get that in, even if it meant that, I'd struggle financially or, I'd have to make some different choices, but get that in before, you start a family or similar. As far as otherwise, I think it's just, following your heart at the end of the day. Like, I ended up in a completely different sector to what I thought I wanted to do for a fair few years, but life kind of just led me to where I wanted to be eventually, because it was in me. And it was what I wanted, even if I forgot it for a while whilst I was doing something completely different. So I think it's such a cliche, isn't it? But, follow your hearts and don't give up on that.
I think you're a great example of that, right? It is that has always been in your heart. And so longer term, that is what has come together. And so I guess as we wrap up, one question I have for you then, perhaps Ben has one more as well, is let's fast forward 10 years. COVID has taken over 2020. It will probably dominate much of the narrative of 2021 as well. But in 10 years, where would you like to be, or what would you like to be doing, or what would you have achieved, do you hope, in 10 years' time?
I don't know is the honest answer to that. And I'm going to just go ahead and say to the young people listening out there that it's okay not to know.
Absolutely.
I think at the moment, I've still got a passion for this line of work. I'm not necessarily going to be in these organizations in 10 years' time or in these roles in 10 years' time. But right now, it's the only thing that I feel the passion for as far as kind of career choices go. So I'm happy carrying on with this. I also have a huge passion for the smaller organizations. So I can't necessarily see myself, at a huge international charity. So right now I'm quite happy. I think I think time will tell. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. But I think it's okay not to know, even at this ripe age.
100%. For what it's worth, I'm the same as you. I could not tell you what I'm going to do in 10 years. I couldn't answer that question that I just asked you. And I completely
that was a bit horrible of you then.
I completely agree that, I'm similar in that I think I try and be in the moment a bit and just be present in doing what I'm doing now and make sure that I enjoy life in some way as I do that. And that enjoyment can be through passion or purpose or
and whilst it can be hard sometimes to, like I said before, a lot of this work can be sitting in an office, and you could be working for anyone or anything really. It's the same, isn't it? So you have to remind yourself of that passion every now and then, and especially now, because we're all isolated and we're working away from each other, so you don't get that get that kind of passion. I was going to say it's infectious. It's not probably the right thing to say at this time and age, but being around those other people who are passionate about the same cause, that's where it rubs off and you feed from each other, and that's ideal. And we don't get that at the moment, so it's really hard sometimes to remember that I love doing this and I love doing this because of A, B, and C. So you kind of have to put together some strategies of reminding yourself of that. But despite that, it's there, and you kind of just need to dig it.
It comes back to something that I think comes up pretty much, maybe not if every episode, but most episodes, goes back to the question we often ask kids, right? You see you round at an event, well, when you used to be able to go round to people's houses, and you're talking to other people's children, and you idly go, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which is that question that ultimately I think we're addressing. It's probably prompted us to make the podcast. Is what an irrelevant question that is, for especially for our own children these days. And it's Jamie Casa is probably the reference point who kind of flipped that question to say asking people, what problem do you want to solve, or more around that. And maybe that's the little bit of advice for Dean back at it. Stop asking that question. And that's it.
Yeah, I think, you've talked about it before, how, most of us, and certainly not our kids, are going to be in the same job or even in the same sector for all their lives. And that's fantastic, isn't it? We get these opportunities to try different things and apply our skills to different problems, like you said, which is not necessarily what previous generations were really able to do as much as we will be able to. I think it's awesome.
Just to finally wrap up, if the prospect allows itself, where would you be heading back to India, Haiti, and South Sudan in 2021 potentially, and sort of what were those trips potentially looking for?
Yes, absolutely. So the last trip I did was to Uganda and South Sudan a year ago around this time, and we did a lot of good work and a lot of kind of assessing the situation. And there's a lot of projects that have come to life since, and it would be wonderful to see those projects now and where they are now, and be able to kind of go back and assess that. And similarly to projects in India and Haiti, I'm not sure if I necessarily see that happening the way things are going at the moment, and that provides its own challenges, because communication, it is sometimes difficult, and there are some cultural differences in the level of communication that's expected back and forth, and kind of trying to translate that information that maybe some stuffy funders somewhere in London might need from a project on the field somewhere in Haiti, for example. It can be quite difficult to sometimes get that statistical data or that bit of information from there. So so in that sense as well, it would be great to go out and do those assessment visits myself. But we kind of roll with the punches at the moment, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's probably about fair. And then I suppose I said finally a couple of times, but we'll try one more finally. I know you've got a lot of different things going on with Adventure Ashram over the coming, I think, into 2022 and beyond. For anyone that's listened and is about to click on the link to go and explore Adventure Ashram and other charities, what would you like them to be aware of in terms of the projects you've got in mind and the funding that you're looking to allocate in 2021?
So for Adventure Ashram, I mean, part of what we do is we facilitate trips to India, and these trips might be cycling tours or they might be motorbiking. And as part of those trips, you can visit the programs that we run there or help run there. Now, we do have some of those coming up if that's something that's of interest to people. We're also expanding, or we were due to expand to Thailand in 2020. And we were running a 2-week motorbiking tour of Thailand. And as part of that, visiting a project that we're supporting on the border with Myanmar, supporting refugees from Myanmar. Now, obviously, that hasn't happened this year, so that's been postponed to the end of 21. So, if you're a motorbiker, or even if you're not, there's support vehicles, and that's something that would be of interest. It's a fantastic trip. Then, the information is on the Adventure Ashram website. And for Hope Health Action, there's lots happening. I mean, the hospital in Haiti is it's one of the leading hospitals of North Haiti, and we are looking to expand the neonatal and maternity wards in the coming years. So there's a lot of work and a lot of support required there to help those newborn babies and mums in a country where healthcare systems are barely operable. We're hoping to go back to South Sudan as and when the security situation so allows. And we're looking to establish some small health clinics in the southern part of the country. So there's lots happening. And I am always available to tell more.
We'll put links both to Hope Health Action and Adventure Ashram in the description as well. So please do go find out more and donate on the websites. Jemina, it has been so good to chat to you. You are such a calming presence. I've really enjoyed listening to you. My husband wouldn't agree with that. Well, I've enjoyed listening to you anyway and finding out more about your journey. And it's so great. It's actually rare from the people we've spoken to that someone really has had a passion from when they were young. That has really stayed with them through their lives. Often people get taken on a different tangent, but it's clear that you've always kind of come back to international development and to NGOs and charities, I guess. So thanks for taking the time to chat to us today. I really appreciate it. And it's been really good to get to know you. Thank you so much. It wasn't as scary as I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why you might think that looking at us, but it's not too bad. I think there's so much more we could have delved into with international development, with women's rights. That so hopefully we can maybe catch up again in the future, and when you've had a chance to maybe do a trip, and we can sort of tag some more on there. But absolutely.
Sorry, I was going to say I didn't get a chance to do my feminist rants.
Don't call them rants either. I became slightly more enlightened after reading a couple of books recently. So I wouldn't call it rant. I just call it, my God, what on earth is going on and why is it still like this
I know. Yeah, you recommended a good book to me as well, Ben. I need to read it.
Oh yeah, Invisible Women by
Yes.
Caroline Criado Perez. Yeah, I reference it a lot because it was, as I think I said to you, epiphany for me, probably just confirmation of reality for the other 50% of the population. But really, it's interesting to see all of those disparities actually borne out in data. Like what I think, would I talk about the car? If you and I drive a car, I'm safer than you are.
Yeah. All the crash test dummies tested on men. Is that?
Yeah, they're all the dimensions and weight of men.
Yeah, absolutely.
So lots to explore with that as well. Maybe we'll do a bonus episode where when you've read the book, you can sort of give us your perspective on it. Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Thanks for having me.